Okay, happy Friday. I'm re-recording this video because the first one was 20 minutes long and I don't want to do that to you guys. So let's just go into this. So we're graphing sine and cosine. A couple words or definitions to know. Sine and cosine graphs are what are called periodic functions, which is just a fancy term for saying it repeats. So when you graph, it's just going to be repeating. The period represents how long it takes to start repeating. The midline, so basically sine and cosine, when you graph these, they're going to be waves. And midline is exactly how it sounds. It's the middle of the wave. It's a line that goes through the middle of the wave. The amplitude is, if we're talking in terms of waves like in the ocean or anything like that, which would look similar to what the graph is going to look like, the amplitude is the distance away from the midline. But if I had to summarize it, it would be like the height of the wave. So midline is like the height of the wave. Or sorry, the midline's in the middle. Amplitude is how tall it is. Okay, so looking specifically at the term periodic, the one on the left is an example of a graph that is periodic. If you look at it, it has this arch shape that keeps repeating. So it starts here, then it repeats and does another arch, then it makes another arch, and so on. The one on the right has this kind of zigzag, so it has like an A shape, and the A shape does repeat, but it keeps getting taller, so it's not repeating perfectly, so that means that it's not periodic. Now this looks confusing, but that's because it's four graphs graphed on the same axis or whatever. So these are four sine waves. The difference between the four waves is, as you can see, they're different heights. And the heights match the numbers that are in front of the sine. So notice that the 1 is the blue wave, which is right here, and the 1 is the shortest wave. The sign that has a 4 in front of it is the red, which is the tallest wave. So that's changing the number in front, just changes the height of the wave. Changing the period of the wave just changes how many times it repeats. So here is your regular original parent function for sine. It's the one in orange. Notice that it makes one repetition. This blue one is a 2x, which means it repeats twice. There's 1, there's 2. And then this is a half x, so that means it makes half of a wave. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the difference between sine versus cosine. So just a couple things that I've already talked about. Your A represents your amplitude, and B is the number you plug into the formula to find the period. Here's the difference between sine and cosine, but first let me put in the marks on the graph. For all the graphs that we're going to do, we're going to put 4 marks on the x-axis on the left and the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4 on the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and evenly spaced out. And then we're going to have whatever the top of the wave and whatever the bottom of the wave. Same thing for cosine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then top of the wave, bottom of the wave. Okay, so sine and cosine are both waves, so they look almost identical. Here's the difference between the two. Sine starts on the origin. The wave starts right there in the middle, versus cosine that starts not at the middle, but at the top of the wave. So sine starts in the middle, then for the next mark over, it goes to the top, then the middle, then the bottom, then the middle. Notice that I'm putting a point at each of these marks that I have on the x-axis. Cosine, rather than starting in the middle, starts at the top and then it goes down. So starts at the top, next mark over, it goes to the middle, then the bottom, then back to the middle, then the top. So that's the difference. Sine looks like this versus cosine that starts at the top and looks like this. After that, it repeats. So you would draw an arrow at the end. And then you would continue the wave to the left side and into the negatives. So another way of thinking of this, if you can't remember it that way, here's a way that I memorize it. So I just say sine, what it does is it starts at the middle, so let's say 0, and then it goes up to the top, which in this case would be 1, then it goes back to the middle, and then down into the negatives, so down at -1 is the bottom of the wave, and then back to the middle. Versus cosine starts at the top, so let's say 1, or if it's not, if the amplitude is something other than a 1, you would put whatever the number the amplitude is. And then it goes to the middle at 0, then it goes down into the negatives, then back to the middle, then back to the top. So I just memorize it in terms of numbers like this. Or if you're more of a person that likes words, instead of a 0, you can say sine starts in the middle, then goes up to the top, then the middle, then the bottom into the negatives, and then ends back in the middle where it started. And you could just apply the same things to the cosine. Cosine starts at the top, middle, bottom, middle, top. Okay, so let's just jump into one of these. It's the easiest way you're going to be able to catch on. So, why do these not have the graphs on there? Anyways, so sine and cosine. First, let's start by finding the amplitude. Notice that I have steps for you there to follow. So amplitude is A and B is the number used for the period. So amplitude is going to be the absolute value of 3. So what's the absolute value of 3? Just 3. Remember, absolute value just makes a number positive if it's not already. The period, we're using the formula 2 pi over b. So when I plug in, well, what is b in this case? Well, there's no number in front of the x. So you have to assume that there's a 1, so we're going to be doing 2 pi over 1. Simplify that. When you divide, 2 divided by 1 is just 2. Okay. Now I'm going to draw the graphs. So that was step 1 and step 2. Step 3 and 4 is going to be to set up the graph basically. So I'll do the graph there and there. And then you're going to draw 4 marks on each side. So 1, 2, 3, 4. On the right side, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the top and then the bottom for whatever the amplitude is, whatever the height of the wave. So let's see, find the amplitude, step 1. Step 2, find the period. Step 3 is to put 4 marks on each side of the x-axis. Oh, we need to label them. So I'm going to label the x-axis. So the way you label it is using the number for the period. So the period was 2 pi, so that's what's going to go on the end, 2 pi. And then the left side is going to be the negative side, so negative 2 pi. Then we just need to label the halfway point. So you need to ask yourself, all right, here's 0 and here's 2 pi. What's halfway between 0 and 2 pi? 1 pi. So I'm just going to write 1 pi. Though you don't really need the 1 there, so you would just leave it as pi. Same thing on the negative side, negative 1 pi on the left. Okay, now I've set up my x-axis. Now I need to set up the y-axis. So the y-axis is just your amplitude, so it goes up to +3 and goes down to -3. Boom, so that was step 4. And then the last step is to graph sine or cosine. So looking at this problem, it looks like it is a sine. So if you remember, sine goes 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. And that's what I'm going to use to put my points on the graph. So sine should start in the middle at 0. Then you go 1 mark over, and then it'll be at the top. So notice that over here I wrote a 1. But remember, I changed the amplitude. This one has an amplitude of 3, so that means it'll be a positive 3. And then instead of a -1, it'll be -3, because this wave is going to be taller than your typical sine wave. So it goes up to from 0, then up to 3, then back to the 0 or the middle, then down to -3, and then back to 0. Then you connect the dots, and that'll be your wave. So connect the dots to create a wave, and then draw an arrow at the end. Now we need to continue the graph into the negatives, so I will continue the graph into the negatives. Now you don't just repeat this again, because if you repeated that, then it would look like this. And does that look like a smooth wave to you? No, because it'll be jagged right there. See, that's not a smooth wave. So then what you have to do is just continue the wave from where it's going. So following along the wave here, we're at this point going backwards, so it was right here. Then the next point is going to be down here, then the middle, then up to the top, then back to the middle. Connect those dots, and then that's going to be your wave. And you'll know you did it right because it'll be a smooth up and down kind of thing. Okay, next problem. So again, writing A and B. So A is your amplitude, and B is going to be the number you plug in for the formula. So the amplitude is going to be, well, there's no number there. So what are you supposed to assume? That there's no number? You assume that it's a 1. So you take the absolute value of 1. I'm going to do a fancy one because if I just did a line, it would look like 3 lines. All right, then period is 2 pi divided by b. In this case, b is 2. So I'm going to write 2 pi divided by 2. Simplify that to be just 1 pi. Okay, so that was step 1 and step 2. Step 3 is to do the x-axis. So let me go ahead and do the graph. Okay, so the x-axis, again, put 4 marks on each side. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you're going to label it. So always label using the periods. So pi, and then negative pi on the left side. And then we just need to mark the halfway point. Well, here is 0, and here's 1 pi. So what's halfway between 0 and 1? A half. Now we don't write a half though, we write just pi over 2. But if you wanted to, you could put a half there, it would look like that, but it's not necessary. This is what you'll see it most commonly. And then same thing on the left side, negative pi over 2. Okay, that was step 3. Step 4 is to put your amplitude, so it goes up to, looks like the amplitude's 1, so up to +1, down to -1. And then the last step is to just graph sine or cosine. So this one's a cosine. So then cosine, if you remember, cosine goes 1, 0, -1, 0, 1. So that's how I'm going to put my points. So cosine starts at the top at 1, then it goes to 0 on the next mark over, and then the next mark it goes into the negatives, then the next mark it goes into back to 0, and then the last mark it goes back up to 1. Where it started. Connect the dots, and there's your sine or cosine wave. Then you just need to continue the wave into the negative side. So if I'm going to follow this, then my next point is going to be in the middle. Then the next point's negative, middle, top, and then that's a full wave. So it looks like this. You'll know you did it right. Again, if you don't have anything that's too jagged, if you can draw a smooth up and down wave that doesn't just stop, change direction in the middle. Okay. Sorry I was rushing. I was trying to make this video as short as possible. Here's your homework. As always, ask me any questions through Edsby.